Um, So if you're just joining us and haven't come to any of our masterclasses before, this and all our other masterclasses have been part of PressPad Remote, which is kind of like our activities we've been doing to make up for the fact that we can't, that people can't get work experience and internships, and we can't really house people in houses, what we normally do. So we've just been doing Q&As, speed mentoring sessions like the one we had last night, masterclasses which have been on like a range of topics from like freelancing to like mobile journalism and stuff like that. And yeah, we're just trying to make most of what we can using online resources.
Cool. And we're taking a break for August, but so we're going out on a bang with Frank. Okay, so we're now live on Facebook. So hi, if you're joining us on Facebook. My colleague Amber will be monitoring the comments on there. So do ask questions on there because they will actually feed back to Frank. And please make sure you stay on mute, preferably with a video off, just to make sure we've got like the bandwidth and everything. We're going to be recording and putting on YouTube, but at the end when we do the Q&A where you can sort of share your problems, sort of agony uncle section of the talk, we won't be putting that on YouTube, just so that you can be really honest if you want. And obviously we'll protect your confidentiality if you do want to bring something up, but the rest of the talk, until I say it's not being recorded, will be recorded and put on YouTube. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Frank. He is our diversity and inclusion consultant, and he's an expert in all these things. And he also has a really interesting story to tell about his own life, and some tools and techniques for you if you've ever felt like I have when I suffered really badly from imposter syndrome. So obviously I wish I'd come to this masterclass at that point. So I'll hand over to Frank now and shut up.
Thanks, Nicola. Thank you very much for the introduction. Quite like being an agony uncle as well. I feel like I'm providing value to this community. So we'll just crack straight into the presentation because I'm really keen to leave enough time for any questions for, especially this topic around imposter syndrome. It's quite an interesting one to discuss. So give me 1 second and I will just share my presentation. If Nicola or Io, if you could just let me know if you can actually see it on the screen, that'd be great. Has that popped up?
Yes, it has, yes.
It has, amazing. Thank you so much. All right, great. So imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome? It's something which has been, I would say, the bane of my life in many instances. It's that feeling of your accomplishments not necessarily being earned. If you've ever felt that moment where you've got an amazing opportunity and you feel like you just got lucky, how did you get there? What were you doing being in that room with other individuals, and how did you make it possible? And it's something which plagues a lot of people, unfortunately. I've had conversations with senior executives, CEO level individuals who are running companies, and they've sat down with me over a coffee and said, Frank, I'm making it up as I go along. I don't necessarily know every single answer. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. It doesn't matter what level you're at on your career journey, imposter syndrome is something that exists across that journey, and there are so many mechanisms and tools that you can use to overcome it. And I will share a little bit about my journey of imposter syndrome very soon. Here are some examples. So feeling like you're a fraud, probably one of the most common examples. You're amongst people that you consider to be high performers, right? They're doing some amazing work, they're slaying, they're getting promotions, they're getting accolades, they are getting recognized by colleagues, and you feel like you just should not be there. Like, how have you managed to get into this group, and how are you still there? And every single day you're kind of troubled with this feeling of being fraudulent. I think the second, probably one of the most common examples, is really questioning your talent? Are you as good as you think you are? People, maybe some people are validating your expertise and saying, great, you've done a good job, but is that talent a real thing? Is that something that you should be proud of? And then the last point here is definitely lacking a sense of belonging. I mean, I never forget listening to a talk by Michelle Obama some time ago, and her questioning whether she would be a good enough first lady in the White House, because just imagine that as an opportunity, right? You know, it's such a big thing to be able to be able to work in the White House and to take that kind of role. But we often lack a sense of belonging because the world around us, society around us, isn't necessarily built for the individuals that we are. Let's dispel a myth. We all experience it. I think the stat is something like 70% of people have feelings of imposter syndrome, of anxiety, of perfectionism, of self-doubt, and that general fear of failure. I know I certainly have. I've had multiple experiences of that, especially that self-doubt. You know, my background, I come from single parent household, grew up in the east of London, didn't come from any particular financial privilege, had to figure a lot of things out. I'm also mixed race as well. So I'm Sri Lankan and Nigerian, and I grew up in London. So I also had that kind of identity crisis in terms of my culture and ethnicity. And all of these things combined gave me an immense feeling of self-doubt. Who am I? You know, what do I represent? What are my skills? What am I good at in general? What could my career be in the future? Will I ever get to a certain level? That coupled with that fear of failure often created this feeling of inertia, me just thinking like, actually, I just can't attempt to do anything because I may fail. And that feeling of failure was worse than trying. But I'm here now, so I can definitely say that there are a number of things you can do to overcome these feelings. But the important point with this is to know that there are people around you that are experiencing exactly the same thing, irrespective of where they are on their career journey. We then need to look at something like intersectionality. So intersectionality is essentially your lived experience. You know, how does your lived experience influence the opinions of yourself? Again, to go back to a personal story, I'm used to living in a world which doesn't feel like it was ever built for me. You know, growing up, you know, identify as a black man, as a black man growing up in London in the 80s and 90s. I used to get followed around in shops. I used to get stopped by the police. I've never done anything criminal in my life. You know, my mom is very light-skinned, so I'd go out with my mom, and people would say, "Well, you know, are you out with your teacher?" Basically, which is pretty awful actually as a young child. But because of those feelings of feeling different, not feeling like I'm part of the whole, part of wider society, those feelings enabled me to kind of exclude myself from everything. You know, always thinking that in some way I'm different to everyone else. If there is a normal, I am not that normal. You know, I am totally someone who's maybe somewhat unique, but maybe not as good or as talented as some of the other individuals out there. And of course, as a complete fallacy, you know, that is not the truth. But my intersectionality, my lived experience meant that I was often challenged with that. Throughout my life, I would say it has been one of my biggest problems in imposter syndrome. I didn't grow up speaking like this, for example. I had to teach myself how to become, let's say, quote unquote, more articulate, because I recognized that working in a corporate world, in a predominantly white world as well, there were these normative behaviors in terms of how people spoke and how they acted. And if I was to have any chance, and I don't necessarily recommend that you do this, but if I was to have any chance of success in this world, I had to recognize how it worked. And I went through a process of neutralizing my accents. I never really had a very thick, let's say, East London local accent. However, it was different to how it is now. Of course, this is how I speak. I'm not putting on a voice for you all this evening. But the point I'm trying to make is it's that feeling that I'm different. It's that feeling that I've got to conform and I've got to almost kind of shape who I am. And intersectionality, I think, has a big impact and a big influence on that wider topic of imposter syndrome. You know, who do you identify as? You know, do you have a visible faith group? You know, what is your socioeconomic background? You know, how did you get to where you are today? You know, these are all the things that provoke those feelings of anxiety and self-doubt. My imposter syndrome was so bad that I remember when I used to have conversations with people, I used to basically look at the floor because I felt like there's no way that this guy, this person who I've been working since I was 17 years old, I don't have a degree, I've got average GCSEs, I must be a lot more stupid than the person that I'm talking to. Like, they must be incredible. They must be that much smarter than I am. And that plagued me for years and years and years, which is kind of an awful feeling when you think about it. But to the point where I actually went and got therapy for it. I got some hypnotherapy. I had a couple of sessions of hypnotherapy because I had to kind of write myself. And again, I don't necessarily recommend all these things, but I'm just sharing my lived experience to explain that it does happen to everyone at any stage of your career. And how I was to solve it was to go on to that journey of, you know, figuring out who I was, believing in my talents a lot more, and then also actually getting someone to help me, where that's not always an opportunity for everyone. Obviously, I'm going to leave you with some tools today, but I think it's just getting to that point of understanding, you know, your intersectionality and maybe how that's influenced your journey to date. So here's a thought that we don't always think about. Everyone is flawed. You know, if you've got an Instagram account, you would not believe this. You know, I just logged into my Instagram account earlier today. I went through my news feed. I saw what a few of my friends are up to. You know, some of them have just gone on holiday to Ibiza. A few of them have just got promoted. They've got some great things happening. I've literally spent the day sitting in the corner of my room by a desk, working away, not very glamorous at all. But society leads us to believe that no one is flawed, right? That there are so many individuals who are in some way perfect. They're following a kind of a perfect path in life, which is again, it's a complete and utter fallacy. And I think the action there is like, how do we challenge our beliefs? How do we look at that Instagram feed and actually question that? How do we remind ourselves that behind Instagram, behind social media, behind all of these stories that people tell, there is a lived experience that we can't necessarily understand. It's impossible to know what challenges some people are going through just by looking at what they're saying on social media. I think sometimes as a human race, we can be brilliant at projecting a facade. You know, we can be brilliant at talking about just our successes and just the best things that we've experienced in our life and all of our accomplishments. But in reality, we never talk about what it's taken to get there. You know, anytime I share my journey with people, I say I'm a 20-year overnight success. You know, it's taken me that long to get to a point where I can run my own company and work on several projects. It's taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But these days, I always remind myself that everyone is flawed around me and everyone is going on their own personal journey. Here's another thought. There's no threshold to accomplishment. So again, you know, when we think about our peers and when we think about people that we work with that are doing particularly well, we want to aspire to a certain level. I never forget when I pivoted. I used to work in property. I worked in property for about 10 years, and then I moved into D&I and technology and the whole startup world. And I was really winding myself up because I kept seeing articles of top 30 under 30 and top 40 under 40 and all these amazing things that people are accomplishing, and thinking, like, how do I get there? Like, what do I need to do in order to achieve the same success? You know, why can't that success be in front of me now? What mistakes am I making that I need to correct? And what I've learned over time now is just, it doesn't work that way. Success is relative. You know, there is no particular threshold to accomplishment. Yes, we may aspire to a particular position in life. Let's say if we're working in a company and we want to get up the runway, or we aspire to running our own company and we want that to be successful, or maybe we have personal goals, so we want to provide for our family, for example. That was definitely a goal of mine, and has been a goal of mine even to this day. However, what that means for us is a personal thing. So I would always say, take pride in your achievements. You know, look at the past and consider some of the amazing things that you've accomplished, and you'll surprise yourself. I mean, I've learned to appreciate the really small accomplishments that I've made, certainly over the last 10 or 20 years. For example, when I was about 14, I think about 13, 14 years old, I really started to follow this path of personal development, because I had a lot going on in my household, and I just thought to myself, I need to figure out who I am and who I'm going to be, and which is quite cerebral at 14 years old. But hey, I started to dive into that. And through that journey of personal development, I started to teach myself things, you know, anything from laying floorboards to cooking to, you know, becoming a more confident person amongst my friends, and just various things that I would just read, dive into books, and then later, obviously, YouTube appeared. But today, I've learned to take pride in that journey, and take pride that I bothered to do it. Basically, not everyone does, and it's not a normal thing to just accomplish things off the bat. You know, it does take effort. It does take diving into our insecurities, and that's a really great thing if you can do it. People don't voice their insecurities. This is a major point that I kind of wanted to discuss with you, to go back to that earlier point of projecting a facade. We are so great at not sharing some of our insecurities. I mean, I can share a few of mine today. I mean, I mentioned one earlier in terms of just having that constant feeling that I'm not as smart as the person I'm speaking with. And how crazy is that? I don't need to be as smart as them. They may be smarter than me. There's no particular benchmark, and it's not even important. You know, it's not even relevant to anything in particular, unless I'm playing a game where I think if you've ever seen The Chaser on ITV, and you've got to answer questions which are based on maybe your intellect or your general knowledge, fair enough, there's a gauge there. But if there isn't a gauge, then it doesn't really matter. And I think we often get to the point where we're really scared to voice our insecurities, but even to ourselves, let alone anyone else. And this is where the accountability really needs to kick in. We need to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, maybe this is where I'm not very good, and this is where I need to improve. It's building that level of self-awareness. And I think that really helps you on your journey of tackling imposter syndrome. This is unequivocally one of my beliefs. You know, true confidence is really knowing your weaknesses. Weaknesses, you know, we can sometimes treat as a kind of a dirty word. You know, we shouldn't talk about weakness, especially if you've grown up with parents who, let's say, are high achievers, and then maybe succeeded at anything they've put their hand to. We can sometimes think that we're not as good as they are, and therefore we're weak, we're not up for it. But, you know, in my personal opinion, understanding your weaknesses is key to knowing where your true confidence lies. It's building that self-awareness that gives you that self-belief, that eradicates that anxiety and helps you to manage that self-doubt. You know, these days, I know, for example, I am terrible at basketball and pretty much any sport out there. So if you challenge me to a basketball game or a football game, I'm probably going to lose. I'm not afraid to say that. It's not a strength of mine at all. And I can laugh about it and it's no big deal. So if I get on the field and I mess up, that's okay. Because it's not one of my strengths. And what I'm not saying is that you can't turn those weaknesses into strengths, but that true confidence where you can kind of sit back and take a moment and admire your achievements comes from understanding, you know, where you need to improve or where you're just necessarily, you know, where you might just be weak, and that's okay. There's no shame in that whatsoever. So I've got a few tasks that I want everyone to walk away with. The first task is writing down a list of your accomplishments. So I have this list in one of my notepads. I've also got it in my iPad. Every time I achieve an accomplishment, I add to that list. So recently I became a contributor for Forbes. I was confirmed about, I think, 3-4 weeks ago. That for me was a major accomplishment. I was really excited to hear that. And that is something I can refer to. So when I'm having a challenging time, when I am feeling that sense of imposter syndrome, I often look at this list to remind myself about the journey and what I've accomplished, especially when I'm questioning my talent or questioning my ability. Second task is talking about imposter syndrome in a group. You've got to clear this misconception that you're the only person experiencing it. If I can talk to C-level executives, VPs of, you know, really kind of successful startups, scale-ups, and corporate companies, and they admit that they're learning on the job, I guarantee you there are so many individuals who are experiencing exactly the same thing. And what's sometimes beneficial when talking about imposter syndrome is to find yourself a mentor. You know, find yourself someone who can share their journey, who can talk about their experiences, and if they're willing to discuss their weaknesses and maybe some of the things that they've learned on the way, that's a great resource for you to tap into, because A, it's going to give you better visibility on some of the things that you might come up against, but B, it's going to remind you that you're no different to anyone else out there. You're not the strange one. You're not the outsider. Everyone is experiencing exactly the same thing. And finally, journal. So write down and acknowledge your thoughts. Try to put things into perspective. If you've just had a meeting and you've been around some interesting people that have articulated their points brilliantly, and you feel that your point wasn't that great, you know, write that down somewhere. Because when you acknowledge that thought, when you put it into perspective, you realize that, for example, your opinion is an opinion. You know, again, there's no benchmark. Even though you may be in an environment where people aren't necessarily supportive of your opinions and your ideas, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should question yourself. Fundamentally, it's an opinion, it's an idea. You have the right to voice those opinions and ideas. And it's important to remind yourself of that. So, some additional resources. This is a brilliant course. There's some great nuggets within this course that I recommend. I think you can get an Audible subscription, I think for free or for half price. I'm pretty sure you can download the first book for free if you sign up for a new account on Amazon. And if you are to choose a book, I'd recommend this one. This is actually a course. So I think it lasts for about 12 to 16 hours. And it's not specifically about imposter syndrome, but it's various strategies which are kind of rooted in cognitive neuroscience on how you can overcome the kind of malfunctions we have in our brain. You know, important point to remember is imposter syndrome essentially is a feeling, and a feeling is a chemical reaction. It's just a chemical reaction in our brain. It's not something tangible that we can hold on to. And this particular course helps to articulate a lot of those points and really give you some additional tools that you can use, not just with those feelings of self-doubt and anxiety, but also about how do we create new habits, how do we become better versions of ourselves, and how do we work on our self-awareness, because fundamentally, if we can get that right, that will lead us to a much more successful and happier time, not just in our careers, but of course, in life in general. So in summary, definitely talk about your imposter syndrome. No shame in that whatsoever. I talk about it all the time. You know, I talk about it to friends, I talk about it to colleagues. If I'm about to hold a meeting in front of hundreds of people, if I'm about to work with a corporate client, or if someone calls me for my advice, sometimes I feel that sense of imposter syndrome. Am I going to say the right thing? Am I good enough and adequate enough to fit their requirements of me? Well, often those thoughts are irrelevant. And how I manage that is I just talk to people about it. I just have discussions with trusted individuals and give them my perspective of myself. They tell me to stop being ridiculous, which helps. You know, you need your tribe to G you up. You need the right kind of people around you. But I think going on that journey of feeling comfortable to talk about it is really important. Second point there is definitely acknowledge your feelings. So there's absolutely no shame in feeling like you don't belong in a particular environment. You know, to go back to my earlier story, I've never necessarily felt a sense of belonging in any workplace that I've been part of, to be honest. As sad as that may sound, it's my reality. And I've had to kind of learn how to work with that, how to feel like as soon as I walk in that room, I'm an equal. And it has taken me years to get there. It doesn't need to take you years, because you can reprogram yourself now and start to kind of acknowledge those feelings of anxiety and self-doubt and really work on them in a positive way. Leads nicely to my final point, which is celebrate success. Why freaking not, right? You're putting the time in, you're working hard, you're trying to build your career, you're going on that journey. You can spend the majority of your time in this place where you're doubting your ability, you've got these feelings of anxiety, and you don't feel you're good enough. Or the alternative is that you celebrate your success. You enjoy the journey as much as the destination. I can tell you that when I kind of went on that personal journey myself of I guess reminding myself that the destination is just going to take some time to get to. I've got to enjoy the journey there. It completely reframed my thinking on things like imposter syndrome. I started to, for want of a better phrase, lean in to the idea of feeling like an imposter and reminding myself that, look, I've got a long way to go anyway, hopefully a long life ahead. So I may as well enjoy the successes, and unfortunately the failures will be in there too, but that's okay, because those are fundamentally a route to success. Thank you very much. Really keen to now hear from you and hear your questions, maybe your experiences of imposter syndrome, so we can maybe hack some solutions together and share some of our stories, so we can talk about it in the group as well.